You're listening to Ecosysteming, the podcast redefining economic development through the lens of equitable entrepreneurship, 2 decades in the making. Join NC Idea's Tom Rue as he engages with entrepreneurs and experts who are challenging the status quo and driving lasting change.
Welcome, listeners, to the Ecosysteming podcast. I'm your host, Tom Rue, and today I have the incredible good fortune to be joined by Jeffrey Kaplan, who is better known in Western North Carolina as the CEO of Optimism Ventures and Director of Venture Asheville. Are you two titling at the moment, Jeffrey?
I am two titling it at the moment. Great to be here with you, Tom, and listeners of the NCAA Ecosysteming podcast. Yeah, with Optimism Ventures, it's a new C Corp under the Chambers Community Betterment Foundation. And so as a new corporation, it needed officers and a board. So I have a CEO title there and still director at Venture Asheville, which is part of the EDC.
Let me just start with already asking an inappropriate question. Like, you think that's going to, at some point, are you going to have to choose or land on one position or?
No. Thankfully, with these support we've got from the ARC and Dogwood Health Trust, Truist Bank, Bank of America, philanthropists and foundations, we are able to expand our team. So we're expanding our body of work, and allowing me to double dip. It's not really double dipping. Everything's complementary under the same umbrella of the, entrepreneurial ecosystem work we do.
Yeah, and let me touch on that. The entrepreneurial ecosystem work you do, I should say for the listeners, you really are one of our trusted ecosystem partners, and you've been quite a rock and a foundation of the work out there. And I don't get a chance to say thank you enough to our partners, so I'm going to take this opportunity to thank you for the steady hand you've been. It's been quite a journey. I was reflecting. I just had my 9-year anniversary. And let me put it to you this way, since you're the subject. Do you remember when you and I first met?
I sure do.
All right, let's test it.
Back in 2015 is when we met. That was when NC Idea had an interim CEO, executive director. And I think your first week was our last week of Groundwork Labs.
That is correct. We were at Bull McCabe's. And you were working on a startup, if memory serves, Dog Friendly.
With a PH, named by the wonderful Jonathan Prinz, still a friend and mentor in the program.
Yeah, he's an awesome dude. So
I came into Groundwork Labs with the name Man Dog Travel Blog. And it's a terrible URL, terrible business name. And that was always a placeholder. And Jonathan is like a naming wizard, right?
Yeah.
One of his many talents. And he worked really hard on coming up with a name. And so we spelled Dog Friendly wrong on purpose. So it was friendly was spelled PHRENDLY. So there's pros and cons to that. Pros is it's protectable and unique name. The con was no one spelled it right when they were trying to search us.
Yeah, I would imagine.
But now I think that dropping vowels to make words, your business name, like an action verb, where you throw an R on the end of it, or you drop the last few vowels in your suffix, that's gotten super popular. So I think the algorithms are better. But this was, 10, 11 years ago.
Yeah. And people forget there were different rules of engagement, back then, right? This whole space has evolved. And then from that, you did another startup, Just Kibitz, which was, matchmaking is oversimplifying what it was.
It was the oldest form of dating, had yet to come online. And that's how people met, through their friends and family. And that was a point of Just Kibitz, where our target market was parents setting up their appropriately aged children on dates, where the parents would meet and match. And if they thought their kids would get along, they would prepay for their first date in our app.
I thought it was a very clever idea when you're presuming that.
Hindsight's 2020. We did many months of pre-launch research and marketing campaigns, and we're tracking traffic to see where we would launch. And we launched nationally, and a couple international spots. Israel, the UK, and Canada. And so what happened was we had no density. We had a lot of people on the platform, but people were so far apart they couldn't meet. In hindsight, if we had just focused on several key counties like South Florida, where it's a driving culture and dense market, if we just focus on those counties for a while, any marketplace needs density, right? So especially with people, travel and distance are a reality. So had I gone back in time and done it again, I would have focused on very, very specific areas. And I think we would have been a lot more successful.
I think the observation you just shared helps us make a great segue to your current responsibilities, because I think what is underappreciated when you do the work of ecosystem support, helping founders, is your own personal experiences, pursuing the entrepreneurship ring, and in our challenges and our successes, regardless, we bring something to the people we serve. And I think that's what has made you as an effective leader in the ecosystem, because I've seen you in action. And I should mention that for listeners that we're kind of friendly. I count you among my friends. I hope you would do the same.
Mm-hmm. Likewise.
And so I've had many opportunities to observe you in the wild, and it's hard not to say this without sounding paternalistic, but like I'm proud of you. Like you are like a prototype of an ecosystem leader that if I had the power to do, I would replicate.
Well, I appreciate that.
It's empathy too, right? That's a big part of it.
Yeah, I mean, we haven't even addressed that. I'm in Asheville, right? And like how blessed. I don't mean to sound so like whatever, but we're so lucky in Asheville. We have the coolest people, the most interesting, innovative folks, and no matter what you're into, no matter what you do, everyone's got some outdoor hobby. Everyone's into some kind of music. Everyone likes going to shows. Everyone's a foodie here. Everyone likes beer. Even the sober people do, right? Because breweries are a place to be. And so you have this really outgoing, welcoming culture of folks. And when you slice that pie into people who have all those psychographics, but also trying to build high growth ventures, it's the most rewarding and fun work there is. So it's such a joy that I get to do this full time with benefits, right? And not be a volunteer and get to really dedicate myself to this ecosystem and to really work with the most coolest, fun, passionate, driven, hardworking people there are.
And I will say, of the ecosystems in the state, because there's multiple. I mean, there is the statewide, if you will, the cloud that we all kind of collaborate and operate in. And then there's like the regional nuances. And of the regional nuances, I think your corner of the state has probably the healthiest balance, that work-life balance, right? And I think that's one way y'all stand out and can, offer an example to other folks.
That cuts both ways, Tom. So it's such a common complaint of investors that will say, I'm used to investing in a certain type of founder. And when I call my Asheville founder on Friday morning, he says, hey, I'm taking half the day off to go mountain biking. And it's seen as a drawback. And we see that as a strength. We're like, yeah, if when founders' whole identity is inseparable from their venture, it leads to burnout.
And ask about coachability, right?
Right. So if we want healthy mind, body, soul, business model ventures, and it starts with early stage folks we work with, it's true that the founder and the venture are inseparable. Their health is linked. Their identities are linked. We find that by investing in, not monetarily always, but coaching, supporting, developing, and that investing in founders. Great founders build great teams. And great teams lead to more productive and profitable companies.
Yeah. And I would suggest that for those that are in an unhealthy way, the identity to the startup is so, they're one and the same. I think it clouds judgment at times, and it makes it harder to be kind of agnostic to what the data might be telling you. And it can interfere with, logical thinking as to what, if you have to do a pivot. What do you mean have to do a pivot? I came up with this idea, this product. And a lot of learning there.
There's a dark side to that, right? Everyone knows you shouldn't seek external approval for your self-worth, right? Like you should find it within yourself. And when your whole identity is wrapped up in your venture, the market can put an exact dollar amount on what you're worth. and how do you not take that personally? And so it's more than their identity. It's every part of their being. And and it's true. Like it is like their net worth, right? Our founders are majority stakeholders in their ventures, and that's their retirement plan. But without a healthy balance of other facets of your identity or personality, um, you're going to burn out. You're going to have, it's going to lead to anxiety. It's going to lead to sleepless nights and weight on your shoulders all the time. So one of the requirements in our programs is we make our founders volunteer in the community, and they don't get why we make them volunteer. So if you want to be an elevator mentorship program, once a year, you got to be volunteering somewhere. I don't care if it's just you, if it's your team, you're going to do Habitat for Humanity with the whole team one day, or do a service project. You want to volunteer at your church, Cub Scouts, synagogue. We don't care. Get out of your business and foster another side of your identity in the spirit of service. And we find that it's the most restorative thing for our founders' resilience is volunteering.
That is so cool. I don't think I knew that about the program. Just shows I need to pay more attention to the programs we fund.
I can send you some slides if you want.
Thank you for tolerating my ignorance.
Hey, but speaking of ignorance, I do have to acknowledge that today that we're recording this, it's actually Purim, one of the most joyous and fun Jewish holidays. So in honor of that, I don't know if you have anything to drink. I'm going to have a shot of moonshine made in Asheville, Troy & Sons moonshine, the platinum kind. Do you have anything to have a l'chaim with over there, Tom?
So you asked if I have something.
Hey, what do you got there?
I have Uncle Nearest.
Whoa.
Single barrel premium whiskey. Do you happen to know the story about Uncle Nearest?
This is the original Jack Daniels, right?
Yes.
The Jack Daniels took a slave's recipe and turned it to Jack Daniels. And so a woman, is she in Tennessee? The woman who started it?
I believe she is. And she wrote a national bestseller about the what happened to the family, and then brought back the recipe, and it's Black-owned distillery. And it's really trying to return wealth, to the community that built the empire that is Jack Daniels.
Do you think Jack Daniels will one day acquire Uncle Nearest?
I think it would be a shame if they did, but I want to see if I can get the same cork.
I'm going to pour a little l'chaim. I'll show you in the...
Oh, you got great acoustics going.
And I'm putting it in my local to Asheville Perani cup in the whiskey wine sipper.
And I happen to have...
Really, it's a shame this isn't a video podcast.
Because it's just coincidental that I have,
a bar cart next to you.
The perfect glassware for this. But I appreciate l'chaim, and I appreciate having the ability to celebrate with you today.
Likewise.
Oh, man.
Oh, that is just moonshine. That is...
I'm gonna go out on a limb here and say I think I got the better end of that deal.
Yeah, I think I love Troy & Sons, but that's been sitting in my desk for like 6 years. Extra aged, room temp moonshine.
Yeah.
Woo!
Yeah, moonshine's not my poison of choice. It was about 30 years ago. But well, thank you for that cultural respite. And that's one of, I'll segue this back. I mean, I think that's one of many things that I appreciate about you. You are proud of your identity, and you live your values. And I think that goes to your authenticity and why you're so liked by everybody in the area.
I tell folks you can get away with anything in Asheville. Like, we can do stuff at our events, stuff in our newsletter. We can get away with things saying on the microphone, because Asheville is this countercultural place. It's for the radicals, people who don't fit in, people who think different, look different, feel different. And so we get away with a lot here.
So that's all true. And I would just add the layer on top of it is very non-judgmental, right? It's kind of like a live and let live. And every time I'm there, I always kind of, right or wrong, I attribute it to what I've heard many, many times as mountain culture. And, I'm down for it, or I'm here for it, as the kids say.
Yeah, it's giving.
It really is. And that's also a component of our statewide ecosystem. As you know, you've been to many of our statewide meetings and the annual summit, where we want to, always ask for help when we need it, and offer, help when we have the capacity to do so. So let's segue to, your role at Venture Asheville. You built your bona fides, your entrepreneurial bona fides. You took your turn in the barrel, and you got your scars, which also gives you the relevant experience that gives you empathy. And when you're helping others, then you come into this role at a time, where your predecessor, did a nice job, and that was my first introduction to Venture Asheville. And then, he went on to his next adventure, and then you kind of step in there. And I think, I'm not going to speak for you, and I'm not trying to lead the witness, but it seems like you came with an agenda. And I say that as somebody that came to NC Idea with an agenda, right? I really had no interest in just replicating what had been, and not because there was anything wrong with it in historical context. It's just that the world had changed dramatically. And I didn't feel that 90% of our funding should go to two white dudes in the triangle, and thought, there's a lot bigger world in this great state.
I think you said, and occasionally you get it wrong, give it to one white guy in Charlotte.
Yeah, that is the punchline.
I really had a strong agenda, frankly, coming into Venture Asheville. Prior to living in Asheville, I spent about a decade in Gainesville, Florida. I know you've had a couple other Florida Gators on this podcast.
I have. Florida man.
At Florida, yeah, I'm a very proud Florida man. But you should know the good ones get out. So when you meet them outside the state, they're the good ones.
I believe that.
So at Florida, I got my master's in entrepreneurship. Prior to that, I dropped out of a PhD in education. My first job out of school was teaching, and I really liked the middle and high school ages. And when I was at Indiana, I was researching using social media in classrooms back in 2009. We were the first ones to put Twitter into rural Indiana high schools and do work with students. Anyway, when I got to Florida, because I had that background, went back to Florida for my grad program, I was quickly put in the head teaching assistant role, helping all of our faculty at the graduate, undergraduate level with their online courses, because everyone had at least an online component, if not totally online. So I started working there, and then got very involved in the launch of our student incubator, our women's entrepreneurship program, our disabled veterans program, our $50,000 business plan competition. And I had so much fun working with that team at the University of Florida. So coming here to this nascent ecosystem, I've already seen what a thriving ecosystem, a center for entrepreneurship, can do for a community. And I brought a lot of that with me. And so a lot of the events we do are directly taken from my time at Florida. So the Venture 15, our annual ranking and award show, is based on the Gator 100, where we rank the fastest growing Gator companies. When I was in Gainesville, we ran the Gainesville Startup Games. In Asheville, we do the Asheville Startup Games, where startups compete for charities and silly bar games. The way that I changed Elevate from mentorship and due diligence as our core requirements. We still have that mentorship. We added in peer mentorship. We added in entrepreneurial competency assessments and experience portfolios. Hence, that's where the volunteering comes from. You can't think your way into entrepreneurship. You have to get out there and do entrepreneurial things if you're going to become an entrepreneur. So anyone who's got a mentorship program without accountability or a funding program without coaching, it's only half the equation. Having experience portfolios was how they changed our master's program, where you couldn't just do a case study. You couldn't just get A's in class and graduate. You have to do internships. You have to run events. You have to start a business and go to and do pitch competitions.
It's a contact sport, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, hand to hand. Yeah, we say about customer discovery. We say customer discovery is hand to hand combat. But yeah, entrepreneurship is a contact sport. Every accelerator tells you the same thing. There's no answers in the building. You got to get out there and talk to people. So when I came to Venture Asheville, I presented my boss, Clark Duncan, with a 1-year plan. Like, here's what we're going to do in the year. And the first 90 days was only customer discovery, where I interviewed every founder, mentor, investor, stakeholder in our ecosystem. And I asked them the same 5 questions. What do you like? What do you don't like? What do we do good? What do we do poorly? And if you had a magic wand, what could we achieve together? So it was my version of customer discovery. And from that, I was able to take all this data and say, well, I've talked to every mentor and you've identified these 3 problems, and I could pull out from my agenda, here's an event, here's an initiative that we're going to tackle it with. So really use a lot of my own, what I learned at Groundwork Labs in my grad program as well at Florida, here in Venture Asheville. I was kind of slow to roll everything out. I didn't want to like come out the gates the first year with a whole slew of new programs and initiatives. So every kind of 6 months to a year, we're adding something new.
Yeah, I mean, we refer to that as eating our own dog food, right?
Sure. Yeah.
And it's a time tested way to put smart programming into the community, and then just be open to, as things evolve, as circumstances change, right? And if, obviously there was a big circumstance that changed not that long ago in Western North Carolina. And maybe this is some time to pivot to that conversation. One of the questions I had, and I know you want to talk about kind of declining, founding rates, but Helene, again, I don't want to lead you here, but it's my impression that it's going to be, the ecosystem there is going to be different forever, right? That there's not going to be some kind of reversion to the old norm. What's your take on that?
Everything is different, not just the startup ecosystem. Everything here is different post hurricane. Our arts community is completely displaced, right? Like the founding values of Asheville in the Western Carolina area is our thriving arts culture completely displaced. So many amazing restaurants and breweries and everything you love about Asheville is from a small business. And, we've punched above our weight for so long. In 2023, we had 14 million visitors to Asheville, city of 100,000 people. So we've been able to punch above our weight because we had this inflated market size. And so when you lose 14 million visitors, the flow of capital, it's not just like a weaning, it's falling off a cliff. And the ripple effects, even though we've got businesses here that don't even sell to Asheville customers, right? They lost a whole fourth quarter last year for production, and they lost internet and water and power. They couldn't even, right? I had people in my office here at the chamber. Somehow we still had power and hardline internet. So my office at the Chamber of Commerce was this rotating door of entrepreneurs to come in, answer emails, take phone calls, and leave. Yeah. After a disaster, you get an exaggeration of existing issues. So our housing affordability and housing crisis in Asheville is going to get worse. Take out, global politics, land and materials pricing was skyrocketing. And now when you add in politics, our cost of labor is skyrocketing. So there's no, I'm having a hard time trying to be an optimist and find the silver lining in our housing market. I'd love some 3D printed homes out here or something.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's understandable that you feel the way you do, and I think you've said it best, that it amplifies. I think it's also, and this will be my take, from a psyche, like your personal psyche. I didn't know this until I saw reports on this, that the Asheville area was considered like a prime location for what people self-identify as climate refugees, because historically, right, there hadn't been such events, and lower seismic activities, no hurricanes, no tornadoes, and so people from other traumatized regions in the country from natural disaster moved there for that reason. So when that's built into your psyche, your identity of it as an Ashevillean, or member of the Western North Carolina community, and then a natural disaster wreaks this kind of havoc from an identity standpoint, right? If you move to Western North Carolina because you looked at the data, and the data suggested, hey, this is a safe place to live, from the perspective of climate, and then you go through something that's more than just like, okay, a bad storm system blew through and took down some trees and some power lines, it's to the level that you all have seen, it messes with your identity.
Yeah. So, we used to be very much branded as Climate City. We have the NOAA, National Oceanic Atmospheric government building here. There's 2,000 climate scientists who live and work in Asheville. The Collider, has had highs and lows over the years of immense activity. At its peak was really incredible. And we don't talk about it being Climate City anymore. Like that's kind of gone. The magnitude of the disaster here is hard to put into words. So the data is something like 2,000 landslides. Rivers were rerouted. It was maybe 50,000 homes damaged. One of my cars was totaled just from branches falling on it. 105 people lost their lives in Buncombe County alone. And there's still parts of the county that aren't getting help because, these rural areas, even though Buncombe's not considered a rural county, there's rural parts of Buncombe County that are all private roads. And those folks aren't getting any support from the DOT or the cities or the county because it's private roads, which is kind of part of the mountain Appalachian values of, taking care of our own and being independent, not seeking handouts. So it's transformative in every way. And for the company side, it's a totally uneven recovery. That's the best way I can put it. Is some of our companies, like I'm going to talk about Poppy Popcorn. Poppy moved to a different location just last year. They were unaffected, and they're in South Asheville in a different water system. They had water like a week after the storm. So Ginger Frank, the CEO, was opening her doors to all of her other food and bev companies to come use her coolers, use her water, use the power, whatever they need to do to make it through a couple of days. And then you have a place like Asheville Tea Company, where the entire building was lifted up off the foundation, carried by the river into a utility pole, and literally split in half. There's a video of it, of the building being ripped apart by a utility pole as it's flowing, in that fast stream. One of our companies was telling us that their biggest accounts here, it's a CPG company, their biggest accounts were in LA. And the stores that were carrying their products burnt down the Palisades fires, and they lost their biggest accounts. So you have these
Oh my God.
crazy connections and the ripple effects nationally and globally. Everyone in CPG is really worried about tariffs and how it's going to affect their COGS. So even though we're little Asheville in our little corner of North Carolina, we're still very much connected by global and national trends.
I have to tell you, and I think I had the opportunity, I did, as a matter of fact, when we were last there for the info session, and at lunch, we ran into the founder of Poppy Popcorn. And I told her just a quaint little story of mine. I own some land in very northern Michigan. Well, not the UP, but the northern part, right by Traverse City. And I was in a store, this bodega, and walked up on this pyramid display of Poppy Popcorn. And this just big shit-eating grin across my face, to see product North Carolina. And it was a lot of fun. And so I talked to the owner of the store, and she's like, oh, I can't keep enough of it in inventory. And, we sell every bag, and we just look forward to, when the next production lot comes through, because just people come to expect it here. And it's just very, very cool.
I get the same experience when I see our products out in the wild and unexpected places. It gives me such pride.
Yeah, same. Especially the CPG companies when they're in my local co-op. I think I'll take pictures, and I think the peak at the high time, I went in once, and there were 4 companies we had funded that had products on the shelf. It is very cool. But to the reality of dealing with post Helene, we talked before we hit the record button about the new venture creations dropping. I mean, obviously Helene is going to have an impact on that, but you also mentioned that you noticed it's not just Western North Carolina, it's statewide.
Going back to the pandemic, you and I were really aligned on how bullish entrepreneurs can be in so much turbulence. There was it was the best opportunity to try something new. And across the state, we saw record-breaking new venture creation rates. And you've posted about this quite a bit from the Secretary of State as well, looking at 2020 and 2021, just massive jumps in new venture creation. And the way we look at that is we look at a Kaplan Foundation metric, actually, on density rates, where they calculate new ventures created per 1,000 adults, right, per capita. And so I've taken that metric and I've looked at Asheville over the years. And if you go back to like 2009, right, you get a score, right? The score is some number out of 1,000. So in 2009, the Asheville score was 10. So there were 10 new ventures per 1,000 people in the midst of the Great Recession. And you skip ahead to 2014, 5 years later, our local number drops to 7. Right. And so my thought is, right, the recession caused massive layoffs, unemployment. People were driven to entrepreneurship through necessity. And then within 5 years, there's failure rates, consolidations, mergers, people find jobs. And so new venture creation coalesces, it decreases because you have existing ventures that are succeeding. 2020 and 2021, I mean, I'll give you our scores actually. Asheville was 17.2. I think Wilmington, New Hanover County was like 17.6, like really neck and neck. Mecklenburg was in the 40s. Wake County is in the 50s. So can you imagine, like, Wake County, for every 1,000 people, 50 new ventures are created? That's amazing, right? And
yeah, that's why the state numbers were so high.
Yeah, the whole state, every county did well. Now that we're in 2025, I'm looking at 2024's numbers. And the way I do this is I export new ventures, create new business registrations by county for the whole calendar year. And then I do the per capita calculation in an Excel sheet. All the counties I was benchmarking decreased except 2 in 2024. So big drops in Durham. Durham County in 2021 was about 20, 21, and now it's like 14. Wake was over 50s, like 53, and now it's 51. Mecklenburg had a huge drop, probably the biggest drop. 2021, they scored 42, and now they're about 21.
Wow, half.
And so I'm wondering, are we at the tail end of this big wave of new venture creation? And are things more cyclical than we were anticipating? It's not a direct straight line of growth, year over year growth in new venture creation. But it seems like, 5 years after the initial event, if you go back to the recession, you had coalescing, it feels like we're at the trough of this trend.
I wonder if you overlaid, private equity investment trends over those years and periods, if there would be an obvious correlation.
Well, here are the correlations that I ran. So I do want to mention that Catawba County and Haywood County, traditionally rural counties, had increases from 2021 to 2024. Incremental, we're talking no more than a point. What I did overlay was poverty rates by new venture creation. So we have this XY axis of new ventures created on the Y-axis, and the X-axis is poverty rates. So Cumberland County, which is pretty east, right? They have a nearly 19% poverty rate and under a score of under 6 on density. Wake County, right, our top dog in this thing, with their new venture rate nearly 50, their poverty is like 4%. And then there's a lot in the middle. Mecklenburg's got a pretty high new venture creation rate and pretty low poverty rate compared to the others. So my takeaway is there's a correlation between new venture activity rate and lower poverty rates.
You're touching on another data source that I'm very keen on, and I've used their data in my keynote speeches at the summits over several years, and that's the Economic Innovation Group and their Prosperity Index. So they don't necessarily say poverty, but they have, they do it in quintiles. And you can go into their database and go by zip code or by county. And one of the correlations I always found fascinating is in the state of North Carolina, and it's been probably a year since I've checked, but last time I checked, I think there were 4 borders where you had a county in the top quintile bordered by a county in the bottom quintile. And Mecklenburg was one of them. So it's an adjacent county to Mecklenburg. So Mecklenburg was, top quintile in the Prosperity Index. And then an adjacent county, it was in the bottom. And I think to myself, imagine the difference in the lives lived, the lived experience of people, right? Separated by 10 miles, right? And when hard times hit, and even nationally, but you look in a state like ours, you can see the top quintile and then the top 2, quintile counties, they're largely unaffected, right? I mean, and we have to be honest about this, right? Like, eggs was, price of eggs and consumer products was a big deal in the campaign, the election season that we just got through. but people in Wake County, Durham County, Mecklenburg County, like, okay, eggs are $2 a dozen more. Not as big as a deal than, if you're in Robinson County, which I think is usually last or second to last most impoverished county.
Well, I'll tell you, if you live in Buncombe County, you have a buddy who today delivered me. These aren't Trader Joe eggs. He has chickens on his farm. He brought me a fresh dozen.
Yeah, I live in the country. Same. I haven't had to buy store eggs in 9 years. My neighbors have them. 2 neighbors. We're surrounded by farms, and what's really crazy is our one neighbor where we get most of our eggs. They still are charging $3 a dozen, and they're the best damn eggs ever because my wife insists on only buying organic produce, and we overbuy so much of it. We waste so much of it. So she takes our organic produce to feed the chickens of our neighbors, and we get rewarded with, eggs that have like orange yolks.
So it's not a wasted produce.
It's not.
It's not. It's the circle of life.
It is. I'm always just a little sour on the fact that we waste so much.
Think about it as investing, prepaying for your eggs.
And it helps the neighbor keep the egg cost low.
Yeah. I want to go back to Ginger Frank, one of my favorite entrepreneurs. We're talking about her and her philanthropy. So right after Hurricane Helene, we have a family lake house outside Charlotte and Lake Norman. We were camping out there for the month. And Ginger called me one day and said, because we were spared so much in this disaster, and we're in a good position and our sales are good, I want to start a fund. Have you ever started a fund? Do you want to start a fund with me? And I was like, yes to everything you're saying. We went back and forth a couple of days. Ginger really didn't want to do investing as much as she wanted to make grants happen for folks. And it's again, Poppy Popcorn. And I had been talking to folks for, I've been in this role 7 years, and we've never written a check into a company. We've done micro grant programs where we'll raise money from donors and turn it back to founders. We've connected companies to over 60 million in capital in the private markets, but we've never written a check. So we've been pushing this idea for a long time. But when will be the right time to start a fund? And so Ginger kicked off our fundraising, donating $100,000 to a new fund that we started called Optimism Ventures, which we referred to earlier. So she was really the genesis of that program. Optimism Ventures is an accelerator and fund that really emphasizes tech-enabled lifestyle businesses. So we don't need to be unicorn or bust startups. We're not trying to put rocket fuel into Toyotas and Hondas. We're trying to build a portfolio of tech-enabled lifestyle businesses, long-term ambitious companies that don't need follow-on rounds of financing for a hopeful liquidity event. So our founders pay back on a shared profit agreement. We call that a SPA note. That's on our website, optimistventures.co. And when a founder gets a $50,000 check, half of that is a grant and the other half is that SPA note. And so they'll pay back on average $36,000 over 6 years. So $6,000 a year goes back from the founder. So our founders are hearing, I'm getting $50,000 and only paying back 36 over 6 years. They do the math. It's a negative 10% interest rate for our founders. And we're not taking equity, but because we have a shared profit agreement and the cost of capital is diluted by grants, our investors are getting an 11 to 13% interest rate, an ROI, or actually an IRR on their investment with us. So that's why we created all these new categories of corporations so that we can be funneling all this activity from our donors, from our foundation, from Venture Asheville. And we have this kind of Russian nesting doll of corporations now to make this all work.
And congrats for coming up with that funding model for founders. It's very unique. As a matter of fact, I can only think of one better.
Not a grant.
And you help us give away that money
Yeah.
twice a year.
Yeah, we tell folks, if you're competitive for an NCIDEA grant, you'll be very competitive for Optimism Ventures. So much so that we basically copied your application because we had them at the same time, and we told folks, did you apply for NCIDEA? Just copy and paste it into here and we'll review it as fairly.
In my mind, this is the way it's supposed to work, right? We're all vested in this thing of ours. And the way we can leverage with each other, I think truly does make us unique. I took a call just the other day from a CEO of a bio and life sciences accelerator in Massachusetts. And he's been doing analysis on our ecosystem down here. And he's just like, I am so jealous. I am so fascinated on how you guys have pulled this off in North Carolina. He said, because, we can't, the Boston group, they're too cool for school. So like they don't do anything with anybody else. And then we're up here in Central Mass, and the other ecosystem is Western Mass. And like nobody's willing to drive more than 45 minutes to do anything together. And I said, I think that's part of the secret sauce of why North Carolina is probably one of the best states in the nation to start and grow high impact companies. But I might be biased.
Everyone in our world, Tom, is so high in integrity. Like I was listening to your episode with Jim talking about the ecosystem partner meetups. And that is one of my favorite events of the year. And it is a family reunion. It is so much fun to get together with everyone doing this work. Everyone shares the playbook. Everyone is so generous with advice and time. It lives into the Techstars ethos, I think probably even better than they do it, which is give first. I think we do that in spades. And it's part of the nature of all the folks that NC Idea supports, and it trickles down to our founders. And I think people are so surprised at how collaborative our founders are, especially in Asheville. It's part of the magic that makes this so joy-filled and rewarding to do this kind of work here.
Well, we are wildly in agreement. And since you did, listen to at least one of the other podcasts, how I kind of land the plane, and that is to talk about our mutual connections and overlap. And I'm not even going to quiz you. At least per my LinkedIn profile, it says we share 349 mutual connections. And instead of calling out, select specific folks, what I enjoyed scrolling through, I was probably 7 or 8 screens deep on our mutual connections. The one thing that I really liked about that experience was it maps to our ecosystem. So like we have a bunch of mutual connections on the coast. We have a bunch of mutual connections in the triangle. We have a bunch of mutual connections in the triad, right? We have a bunch of mutual connections in your backyard. And that just, to me, again, it's a visualization of this thing that we've built together and the value of it. So, all I hope is that I can still do this for many more years to come, and I will remain one of your biggest fans. And anything we can do to help, with Western North Carolina recovering and beyond, right? I'm hopeful that there will be enough of a resurgence that the pain of the memory of Helene will diminish, quickly and become less painful with time.
Yeah, for the folks that can see through it, see the light at the end of the tunnel, and capitalize on so much turbulence in our local market, they'll do well.
Yeah. All right, my friend, you take care and be well and keep on keeping on.
You too, buddy. See you soon.
Stay connected with NC Idea on LinkedIn and Facebook, and subscribe to our newsletter for all the latest as we celebrate our 20th year. Catch new episodes of Ecosysteming every other Tuesday. Thanks for tuning in and being a part of this thing of ours.